Thanks for tuning into another edition of Another Dolphins podcast. It has been a little while, but we are back. Jake Mendel, joined by Joshua Houtz as always. And Josh, we have done it, my friend. We are just 1 month away from having football games, real professional football games on the schedule. How you doing today?
I was doing good until you said that. Now the anxiety's starting to kick in, right? I mean, we call this the off season, but it has been anything but the off season. Thankful to be able to come on here as always and talk about the Dolphins, man. But you're right, dude. This thing is coming really, really fast. It feels like we almost simulated it, and I guess ready or not, right here it comes.
And we are just days away from the drop. NCAA football 25, and we got to give you guys all a massive shout out, giving us a bunch of questions at AnotherDolphinsPodcast at gmail.com. We hope to be doing more giveaways in the future, but for now, shout out to Devin for winning the giveaway. By the time you're listening to this, you will have received an email. We'll give you 48 hours to respond and let us know how you'd like to receive the game. If not, we'll choose someone else. But thank you guys so much. So today we are going into some more questions, some more listener questions. Josh, we've been away for about a week or so, and you kind of mentioned it. You hit the nail on the head, actually. It kind of felt like a hiatus. So shout out to the listeners, giving us some good questions to help us get back into the swing of things today.
Yeah, I mean, we act like it's difficult to come on here and talk about the team we love, right? But so we get this little hiatus, and it feels like we almost got to, you're going back to work for the first day. You got to get back into the swing of things. So, we have been overwhelmed with the amount of questions. So thank you guys so much for everything you've sent us, and again, congratulations to Devin, because anyone that's been keeping up with the college football game, and it's dropping any day now, and it looks absolutely phenomenal.
So if you're watching the show on 560 WQAM, you get to see Josh's absolutely awesome man cave he's been working on for years, developing as a diehard fan of the Miami Dolphins. So today, as we get into some listener questions, we are actually going to start with Devin. He wants to know, what is the game or season that cemented your fandom? So Joshua, let's start with you. Devin said that for him, it was 2008. Got to go to that AFC East winning team led by Tony Sperano, obviously the Wildcat. And there were two awesome games, the introduction of the Wildcat and then, making the playoffs, a Week 17 win over Brett Favre. Gosh, what was that game? What was that season for you?
Yeah, man. I mean, being a quote-unquote old head, I mean, it should be the Marino days, but when I lived up here in Pennsylvania, you only saw so much of Marino. So that's when my fandom truly began. But like Devin said, it did all go back to that 2007, 2008 season. My first ever Dolphins game was when I went to Dolphins-Eagles, 2007, November 18th. It was John Beck's first start. I think the only touchdown they scored was a Tegan Jr. return. So that started it. And then the next year I went to that, like you said, Jake, that Week 17 win where the Dolphins, Chad Pennington, went to MetLife, took the AFC East. I was there with my dad. So all of that kind of combined to make you this crazy fan that you see today. But I really wish it was some of those early Marino memories, because I feel like the more I see of the early stuff, it just makes me realize how much we missed being outsiders, early in those early Marino days.
I was leaning 2008, but I've always been wearing Dolphin jerseys, so it had to be before then. And I couldn't really say since the start I had the Dan Marino cardboard cutout over the crib, over the little bed. But I don't even think there's got to be a point in the middle of that. And Josh, and I landed on 2002, where it was basically the Ricky Williams season. He carried the ball 383 times, 1,853 rushing yards, 16 touchdowns. That's 4.8 yards per carry. 115 yards per game. And Josh, this season, before I go into probably the two games that stole my heart, this was such a Miami Dolphins season. They started the year 5-1. They began spinning out of control with the 23-10 loss to the Buffalo Bills in Week 7. I think it was like a week before the bye. Led to 3 straight losses. Miami finished the season 9-7 with a 27-24 loss at New England to end the year. Josh, it's incredible how often things have just stayed the same. The Dolphins were up 24-13 with 5 minutes in that game when Orlando Mare made a field goal. And then it went all down there from there. I think Brady connected for a 2-point conversion. It was a mess. But for the good memories, Josh, 29 carries for 143 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Chargers, or 24 carries for 151 yards for a touchdown against the Jets in Week 3. Either way, Ricky was an absolute monster. But man, even then you could see Marino didn't have a running game. Ricky didn't have a passing game. The Dolphins just struggled to have it all together.
Yeah, man. And it's just crazy to think about all the different memories that really stand out in your memory, right? Because those are truly the moments that you remember that kind of built the fan that came before us. And I completely missed one of the biggest moments of my life, honestly, was when Pete Stoyanovich as a kid missed that field goal that could have taken the Dolphins to the AFC Championship game. I think that's a perfect segue into our next question because he could be the biggest villain to me. Because of what I just continue to look back at that, how close we were to getting to a Super Bowl potentially for Dan Marino. So that also helped develop that fandom. But Jake, I had to bring us right into this question, which is from Gio, and he asked, "Who is the biggest villain in Dolphins history? What is the single most destructive decision / move Miami has made?" Mine would be Nick Saban and signing Dante Culpepper instead of Drew Brees. I believe my life would be so different if it wasn't for Nick Saban and that single season. So, I mean, that's probably the first memory a lot of Dolphin fans would go to, right? I mean, so I'm glad he brought this one out. But Jake, let us know who the biggest villain is, and then what that most destructive move is for you as a Dolphins fan, because there's probably a laundry list that could be potentially up there.
For the biggest villain, doesn't your head instantly go Tom Brady? Like, doesn't it have to instantly go Tom Brady? The only saving grace you could have there is it was going around Twitter recently where it was Tom Brady's record versus every team, and the Dolphins were facing Tom Brady, one of the best quarterbacks of all time, 24-12. I think that you can't really call him that big of a villain when he didn't torment the Dolphins too much. But I couldn't really think of anyone else who'd play a bigger role in the downfall of the Dolphins. I don't know, maybe some of the Stephen Ross, if you wanted to have some fun with it, you could say him. And then if you want to go recent history, Josh, I also maybe Brian Flores, when you consider the lost draft picks and how close they were, and wanting to fire, 4 straight offensive coordinators. You could say maybe he's one of the bigger villains. So those were the two that popped in my head. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, Tom Brady was the first one, and again, this Nick Saban Dante Culpepper decision is always weighing in the back of our mind. But for me, I went with Josh Allen because, like you said, man, Tom Brady, we have statistically played well. He will even admit that some of his toughest games came against the Dolphins. I don't think Josh Allen's going to say that. I think he's a 10-2 record against the Miami Dolphins. Has pretty much, for lack of a better word, been our daddy. We've seen the Photoshops going around, the Happy Father's Day, things like that. So for me, ever since this dude has come to the AFC East, it's been a complete, game changer. And while we had Tom Brady and he was good in his own right, Josh Allen's, a different type of quarterback, right? I mean, this guy can beat you with his legs, beat you with his rocket arm, do so many different things. We just got to hope that the Bills completely continue to, I guess, unwind from underneath. So from inside. So that would be mine, Josh Allen. For me, the most destructive moment besides what he said there would have been, I can't remember. I think it was 2008 when the Dolphins, they did sign Tony Sperano, which, I mean, I think we were all pretty happy with that. But there was a quote going around that Mike Tomlin, I think came from Parcells, was too hip hop for the organization. And that has always stuck with me because let's be honest, Mike Tomlin is one of the best coaches in NFL history. And while we like Mike McDaniel, while we like all those, the potential that we have here, we have not had a Mike Tomlin in Miami since, let's be honest, Don Shula. So for me, it'd be the whole missing on Mike Tomlin when he had a chance for some ignorant reason that he was too hip hop, if those rumors were true. What about you, Jake?
Damn, I'm not topping that, man. That you just got me upset because I'm like, I don't know if you'll find something that makes me more annoyed than the Nick Saban and Dante Culpepper, because that was when the Dolphins were supposedly having it all come together. And the idea that they could have had Drew Brees for 15 years. It's those decisions, whether it's a head coach or a quarterback. I don't know if you could really consider like a Mike Wallace or a Ndamukong Suh. I wouldn't really put those because while it is like a massive signing, it's one player. It's a percentage of the salary cap. The Dolphins have ways to manipulate the salary cap. So unless it's a quarterback who is obviously the most important position in sports, or the head coach, I don't think I'd really debate that any other situation would make sense for this question. I think you win this. You win this round, Josh.
We're not competing against each other, but I mean, if we really wanted to ruffle feathers, we could say, the Dolphins botching the tank a few seasons ago, right? But we're not even going to get into that. So there's a couple that we probably missed. If our listeners remember many of those, please, let us know in the comments, because I admittedly have a Dory brain. There's probably so many memories that we pushed to the back that we're trying to forget.
Austin asked, which newest member of the Miami Dolphins will have the biggest impact on this team?
Okay. This is a toss-up between two players for me. I'm hoping I don't steal yours. Hopefully you have a way to, counter this. But I was going to go with Aaron Brewer, right? I think, what he means for that Dolphins offensive line. he needs to come in and be that center. I always go back to what Baldy said to us, Jake, face to face. I like him, but I don't know if if you have the center on the roster, I believe is what he said. So for me, he has to come in and show that he can be that center, can, almost seamlessly have this offense transition with the loss of Connor Williams. So to me, it'd be what Aaron Brewer can do. And if you don't touch on the other guy, I'll bring him up. But what about you, Jake? Who is the biggest addition this year that you think is going to make the biggest impact?
So, Josh, if I was to tell you that, the Dolphins signed a guy, he was penalized 15 times in a season, 13 holds, and the Dolphins just signed him to say, all right, you're going to be our center of the future. Wouldn't you also kind of think that the Dolphins don't have the right center under contract?
I mean, yeah, for sure. But I just get I'm not even going to talk about the other guy, but yeah, I am.
Sorry, I got a cat being an asshole and my camera's not working. I'm sorry, Joshua. But the reason I bring that up is because, Josh, the Dolphins signed Connor Williams to a 2-year, $14 million contract. All of a sudden, he became one of the best centers in the league. I think you hit the nail on the head. Aaron Brewer, that's exactly who I had written down, because I think we are taking for granted the idea that Mike McDaniel doesn't believe you need to spend to have a good center, to have quality interior offensive linemen. And I think that's what we're going to see with Aaron Brewer, the same way we saw it with Connor Williams. Josh, Connor Williams signed a 2-year, $14 million deal with the Dolphins. That's a $7 million average. Connor Williams contract, 3 years, $21 million, $7 million average. I think that this is the one scenario where we think Mike McDaniel needs to have some sort of superpower to impact this roster. If he needs to spend big on Tua, if he needs to spend big on Tyreek and Waddle and all these playmakers, you need to be able to cut coupons and clip corners somewhere. And I think that's how McDaniel can impact the offensive line.
Yeah, we always go back to Baldy because he did, say it's us, and it feels awesome that we were able to have him on the podcast. But there are some analysts and things like that feel good about Aaron Brewer there. So I'm intrigued by what he can bring to this. You mentioned the contract being similar. They almost, swapped these guys out. The other name I was going to throw out there, and I kind of wish I did since you had Brewer down there, but it was Kendall Fuller. I mean, we talked about him on a previous podcast about, how I think we all believe that this is a slight upgrade over Xavier Howard. Maybe not slight based on his performance, but I think what he can bring to that defense and allow everyone else to do could be a game changer. So those are definitely the two players that I feel the most need to have the biggest impact for this 2024 season to go as we expect.
Oh, I love that, man. You know what? And I'm not going to hate on the fact we had the same ones there. I'm hyped that we both, because I think we were both kind of in that category where it's like, all right, Aaron Brewer is cool, but what else are the Dolphins going to do? I think the more we can kind of sit and chew on that signing, you see that like, all right, things are going to make sense here for Mike McDaniel and the Miami Dolphins. Moving on, Jacob asked, if Teron Armstead goes down for roughly 10 games this year, do you think they'll put Kendall Lamb or Patrick Paul in there to replace him? If the answer is Lamb, why do you think we wasted a second-round pick on a developmental project, Joshua Houtz?
Yeah, well, thank you, Jacob. I think you might listen to this podcast because I had, I think I put Patrick Paul down as a guy who I thought might, have an impact as a rookie, and then you mentioned Kendall Lamb, and it kind of just completely, I lost that fact that Kendall Lamb is slated behind Teron Armstead. So, I do think that Kendall Lamb would, get that nod ahead of him, and based on his performance, this offensive line truly did not miss, a beat, so to speak. When he was in there, it didn't look terrible. I guess to the second part of that question, it's because the Dolphins seem to be going after these athletic players, right? These freaks that they think that they, we see the RAS scores that goes around. They like these sort of players that fit a certain mold that they look, to me, at least in my opinion, are looking more at the potential and what they can develop this guy into more so than what he is right now. We saw with Austin Jackson, as we'll talk about. We saw with other players. So for me, that's the biggest thing. I wouldn't get too upset that they might be looking at Patrick Paul as a project because I think a lot of draft analysts, so I think a lot of teams viewed him as that. Kendall Lamb would just be the safer pick, in my opinion. What about you, Jake? Do you have any disagreements with that?
No, Josh, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think timing is everything. I think if it's like last year where Teron Armstead suffers an injury early in the season, I think that'll be a scenario where you see someone like Kendall Lamb come into play. As the season goes on, though, I mean, there's questions if Tron Armstead, if this is his final season. Kendall Lamb has already said that this is his last ride. When you have guys who have been in the league for so long, I mean, you do have to wonder if you reach November and December, if that's a scenario where you've had Armstead for a lot of the year. Maybe Kendall Lamb has had to step in at times at right tackle, He had to do that for a couple of games for Austin Jackson last year. And when you think about how many injuries the Dolphins had on the offensive line, it's really hard to believe that this would be a Channing Tindall or a Cam Smith situation where we were both wondering, hey, why aren't these guys playing at all? I have a hard time seeing a scenario where we're wondering that for an offensive lineman. It seems like no matter what, every season, every offensive lineman is going to play. And hopefully that they're in a scenario where if Paul's number is called, it's in something like a November or December where he's had that time to learn from Butch Barry. He's maybe got a little Blue's Clues looking book of sticky notes from Butch Barry that he's been holding on to for the entire year. And then it's like 20 degrees out, 6'7", 330 pounds. That sounds like the type of playmaker you want in those type of conditions. So that's my perfect scenario. But Josh, this wouldn't be the first time the Dolphins, quote unquote, wasted a second round pick on someone they aren't expecting to play much in year one.
Man, you just had to say that. I guess the only thing I would say to add on to that is the fact that he isn't one of those prospects. We were all during the draft, we like these versatile guys that could play in tackle, guard. This guy was typically, he is strictly a left tackle. He was brought in at least, by our eye, it seems like he was brought in to be Tron Armstead's, successor. So we'll see. I think I agree with you, though. With all the interchangeable pieces we had last season, Patrick Paul might be out there. And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing for the Dolphins this early in his career.
So, Joshua, we are in July. It's crazy to admit that. Rookies will report for training camp on July 16th. Vets will be there 1 week later on July 23rd. And I'm setting the table because Daniel asked that this coaching regime has showed a desire for player development. For example, Austin Jackson went from borderline bust to breakout player worthy of an extension. Who on offense are you looking forward to take that next step? And then maybe on defense too.
I feel gross, and I feel like we might have the same one here, but on offense, for me, I got to go with Liam Eichenberg, right? I mean, it seems like he's going to be a starter there on that offensive line. We realize the Dolphins gave up capital to move up there and draft him. We've all seen it like Daniel said. We saw it with Austin Jackson, some of these other players. So for me, it has to be Liam Eichenberg because that offensive line, we need guards. We need someone to step up, and he seems to be that veteran presence the Dolphins are relying on. To me, the biggest the scariest thing, though, with Liam Eichenberg is the fact that he is still slotted as that backup center. So that would be my offensive player. Jake, do you want to jump in and, give your take on offense and then maybe defense? So I just don't want to step on your toes again because it seems to be the way we go on this pod.
Nah, man, I like the answer. Honestly, I wanted to hear what you had for offense because I had a really hard time with this one. Like, think about how the way the Dolphins are built. There haven't been a lot of player changes in recent years, right? You're switching out wide receiver 3. The Dolphins haven't had the draft capital to go out and get the guys who are going to come in year after year and step in and be those guys to grow. So I think Liam Eichenberg, someone on that offensive line, if you wanted to maybe pitch Rob Jones takes the spot and he doesn't let go, something like that, I think I'd believe it too. But I think Liam Eichenberg makes a lot of sense just because he's going to have so many damn opportunities to, whether it's right guard, whether it's center, to claim one of those starting jobs after really struggling and being, I think, one of PFF's favorite targets in terms of just bad stats.
Yeah, not to get too far down the rabbit hole here, but could we say Tua Tagovailoa in this situation? I know everyone wants to always go back to Tua, but the next step would be what? Winning the division, doing more than just those hollow stats, winning a playoff game, things like that. So maybe that would be that next step that we want to see. So I still think it might be Liam Eichenberg, but just a way to bring Tua into this because we love to do that. Jake, who do you got on defense? Because for me, that might have been a little bit more difficult for me than the offense.
Defense, I went Kader Kohou. Just considering he's been in this unit for 3 years now, obviously you're looking at 3 different defensive coordinators at this point. 5'10", he was really put into a tough spot last year, especially being isolated scenarios against number 1 wide receivers like Stephon Diggs. I think Anthony Weaver in this defense is going to do a better job of really helping that center of the field not be the biggest weakness for the Dolphins. Josh, did you see it was right before 4th of July, but the the Titans game was going around on social media. I think it was Warren Sharp who shared it again, and it was just showing the Will Levis passes. And man, it was so many just like dump offs, waiting for the running back to run over the middle of the field. Chico Conquo, the tight end, I think he did the same thing, where it just seemed like the middle of the field was the biggest issue for the Dolphins. So I'm really thinking Kader Kohou could take that next step, because this defense is going to do be a lot better in terms of just cleaning up the middle of the field.
Yeah, that's a good answer. For me, I had two guys down. I wish I could put Cam Smith down. I know there's a question about Cam Smith later, but I don't know that in year 2 he's really going to be called upon to take that next step. For me, and I don't really know if it's maybe I'm copping out here, maybe I'm looking at it from an analyst perspective, or maybe some of these other teams, but do you think Javon Holland needs to take a next step? I mean, last year, for me, I think Javon Holland's a star in this defense. I think he's a guy that this defense cannot do without, but as we hear, we're moving to a new system. Last season, maybe wasn't the season that Javon Holland had hoped for. I kind of feel like there's still another level to him that I foresee him taking. So I had Javon Holland down, and then another guy that I truly love, and I think that can really take the next step, quote unquote, is Zach Sealer. I mean, he's a guy that, kind of has been overshadowed by Christian Wilkins. A lot of people say he's going to miss Christian Wilkins. That's going to be true, but Christian Wilkins is also going to miss Zach Sealer. So I want to see him also take that next step and prove that, he was doing more for Christian Wilkins than maybe Christian Wilkins was doing for him, and that pains me to say. So those were maybe the two guys that are necessarily, in my opinion, they're stars by Dolphin fans. Maybe a lot of us think they're stars, but Javon Holland doesn't have a new contract. We don't know how he fits in this defense. Zach Sealer, we don't know how he is without Christian Wilkins. Want to see him step up. But Kader Kohou, man, that's a great answer, because I think Kat said it in a previous pod. He could be that, he could be what really gets this defense going if he can be that true nickel that we've seen from him in the past.
There is something with Javon Holland, and we've seen it, right? We've seen that top 3 safety in the league. I think Pro Football Focus had him 2 years ago as their, top 3 safety. I think what is frustrating is, as a rookie, he played 16 games last year, 2022, I should say, 17 games. It seemed like he was right there, the 99-yard return against the Jets, the interception return on Black Friday. And then the knee injuries just, I think, derailed all the momentum he had. I think if Javon Holland finished the season, I think we'd be talking about him a little differently. He had a career-high 3 forced fumbles, the 1 interception in just 12 games played. I think if he finishes up the season, I think we're really banging on the table to get this contract done this year, and not to really, let this get close to testing free agency or anything like that, because I think we'd have the conversation. I think the conversation might be a lot easier if he just finished the season, because he was primed to be that standout safety in that Vic Fangio defense. There's no doubt about that. But it's frustrating because we're blaming it on injuries in a sense, but like, you just wanted to see it. You wanted him to stay a top 3 safety for the entire year, not just, 4, 5, 6 weeks and just see him just, plant the flag. I am a top safety in the league.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think Winfield Jr. just became the highest paid safety. He's a guy Dolphin fans were absolutely gushing about. So we know Javon Holland could be that level. I mean, I don't know if it's right or wrong to kind of give these players on defense a mulligan for last season, because how upset they were with Vic Fangio and things like that. But either way, I think we can both agree that we saw Javon Holland hitting that quote unquote superstar status, and he's still waiting to, ascend, I guess is the word. I'm not sure.
I think the issue with the Fangio defense, and I'm really boiling this down where I don't know if it's like even makes sense, but the best players were Miami's best players, and that's it. Like the defense let Miami's best talent really shine. You think about Wilkins getting his 10 sacks, Bradley Chubb leading the team in sacks. Javon Holland, I think, actually was really showing off with the forced fumbles. I think he set a career high in snaps played at slot cornerback and even in the box. But then you had issues where Kader Kohou was on an island. You had safeties that were absolutely lost. You had Brandon Jones struggling to find himself at times. You had the linebackers a little out of place. So I do think that could be a scenario where the defense for Vic Fangio made those top guys maybe want to get paid a little bit more, but it definitely hurt the defense as a whole. Josh, I think you hinted at this one a little bit earlier. What are your expectations for the Dolphins defense with the additions and subtractions this offseason? Wilkins is a massive loss, but they did a decent job of filling out the defensive line while getting much better in the secondary. That one's from Jack.
Yeah, good question, Jack. I mean, I think it's homerish maybe to say that I feel like this defense can be better this year, but that's kind of where I'm at, right? We sit here, we can nitpick, and like you mentioned, Christian Wilkins is that huge loss, but I feel like every little piece the Dolphins have brought in, these are veterans that can play,
Mhm.
that can fill a role. So you couple that with what they did last season, clearly in a defense that frustrated some. We're going to see Jalen Ramsey become quote unquote maybe more of that solar system. So I want to see him create more turnovers. I do believe this is still going to be a top 10 defense. And I don't know what statistics you go by, things like that, but I do think it might be a better defense than what we've seen on Vic Fangio. And I think a lot of that has to do with maybe not that old school mentality that we've seen from the past. Anthony Weaver's coming in here. He wants to prove that he's not just a disciple from Baltimore, that he had those head coaching jobs or those interviews this offseason for a reason, and that he can, build that defense to replicate Mike McDaniel's offense on the other side of the football. So, again, homer, but I think they're going to be better this year. And I think it's going to have a lot to do with all those little veteran signs like the Kendall Fullers, the Calais Campbells, the Marcus Mays, Poors, and things like that.
So Baltimore led the league with an average of 16.2 points allowed per game. That number even shrunk to 14.7 points per game over the season's final 3 games. And when we look at this defense as a whole, that's kind of what I want to see. I just want to see them peaking at the right time. Josh, do you want to take a stab at stab in the dark about how many points the Dolphins allowed per game over the final 3 weeks of the regular season? It was worse than the league.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was with that Baltimore game. I was gonna say like 36 or something like crazy.
34?
Oh,
very nice.
I'm not good at that. That's crazy. I was close.
So, and like that's one thing, and you can really point to the injuries. Like Josh, the Dolphins were starting Justin Houston at defensive end in the playoffs. Like they were about middle of the pack in terms of roster age to begin the year. By the time the playoffs started, they were the oldest roster in the NFL just because they were signing all these 37-year-old pass rushers to come in and beg for some sort of impact. But Miami, for the course of the season, ranked 22nd with an average of 23.2 points allowed per game. Maybe bringing that down a little bit, Josh, if the Dolphins could somehow have a defense that's sitting around 20 points per game, match that with one of the fiercest offenses, that should be a nice combo.
Let us pray. I always post those little emojis. Let us pray, man, because if this defense can replicate the offense, I mean, that's just scary times for everyone.
Colin asked us, started with a statement, I should say. Our rookies and young players have a hard time seeing the field with the exception of Devon Achane. What's the vision for Cam Smith? How does he fit into this defense? Does he have position flexibility like most of our defensive backs? Josh, I love this question because one of our favorite things to do in the book club is really try to identify a path to playing time and how that can really be folded into more playing time. So what does that look like for Cam Smith?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question from Colin. I mean, for me, we want to see him at least get some special teams reps, right? Isn't that where you start with a guy like Cam Smith? You asked about versatility. I mean, most of his college tape shows that he can play on the boundary, physical, a lot of things to like, but he did have some snaps inside at nickel and things like that. So I guess there is a little bit of versatility there, but not as much as some of these other guys like a Cater Kohu, maybe even a Nick Needham or such. So heading into this season, I personally do not expect much out of Cam Smith. I mean, to me, I think that's another player that they saw as the best player available, a guy that they probably had a lot of intel on, right? If we're being completely honest, with Chris Greer and his son being at South Carolina, things like that. I think they even talked about how they discussed that. So I don't know what the vision is here, but I hope, by year 3, year 4, we're sitting here and seeing a feisty cornerback that can play on the boundary like we saw on tape, because he does have the skills, at least, based on a little bit of all 22 that I watched back in college, to be a starting cornerback in this NFL. We just did not see any case of that, in year 1. But like you said, man, it's part of that could have been that Vic Fangio double move. Once he saw that, man, he was right in the doghouse for the rest of his tenure.
Yeah, dude, it's so. I wish I had something to go back to, but what was it? The Jaguars preseason game, I think it was, like in the third quarter, just got absolutely cooked on a double move, and that was the last we saw of Cam Smith. But looking how this defense is really built, and I feel like a broken record when I say that I'm surprised that everyone's so excited about this secondary. Not saying that it wouldn't be good, but when you have, I'm sorry, this is the third time in 5-10 minutes I've mentioned Pro Football Focus, but when you have them saying Kendall Fuller is like a top 10 quarterback in the NFL, I'm going to take a step back because I don't necessarily see, I didn't see that signing as such an earth-shattering move by the Dolphins. But looking at what we can hope for Cam Smith is really develop. Sorry, cat's going and being a cat again. But what I'm really hoping we can see is if you have someone like Kendall Fuller come in He's a little bit older. If he can come in and be that comfortable starter that allows you to play your defense and someone you really don't have to shade for or protect. If he can be that guy for 10 games, you're hoping that Cam Smith can step in. If there's any sort of injuries, if there are any adjustments made, that he could maybe start 6-7 games. Josh, this is going to make a lot of the listeners roll their eyes and maybe get them stuck, but you kind of want them to see what Eli Apple was last year. We saw him appear in about 10-11 games. He started about 6 in place of Xavier Howard and Jalen Ramsey as he recovered from his knee injury. Eli Apple at 6'1", 200 pounds. Cam Smith was listed at 6'1", 180. So the idea is maybe get a little, add a little bulk, start to get some snaps, show Anthony Weaver you can be trusted as one of those boundary cornerbacks, because Josh, if Fuller goes down, the Dolphins, I think one of their biggest weakness is a depth on the boundary, because you have guys like Needham and Cater Coe who are most likely going to be either slot cornerbacks, hybrid safeties, that type of middle of the field type player.
We're really getting emo here towards the end. I'm starting to get sad, and I know this last question I remember was pretty rough. But yeah, we just want to see Cam Smith go out there and not hear his name called, right? Not make plays that hurt the team, and show that he's improving. I mean, this guy's had some of the best coaches, in football, between Jalen Ramsey, Xavier Howard. He had Vic Fangio, and now he has Anthony Weaver and his staff. So just don't get beat. Just show us some improvement, Cam Smith, because we do think the talent's there.
And that's kind of the issue with the Dolphins, especially late in the season, right? They were beat by big plays. Like, I just want this defense to show that, hey, if you're going to beat us, it's got to be 7-8. I would love nothing more that if the Dolphins are getting beat every time it's like a 12, 13 play drive, because it just shows the offense has to go nickel and dime and fight for every single first down. And that'd be a relief after watching Justice Hill go absolutely nuclear in week 17 last year. From FinFan1375. This, Josh, I think this is the hardest question of the entire offseason that nobody is really talking about. Do you think that Mike McDaniel is out if the Dolphins do not win a playoff game? Thinking they will go the Florida Panther way and go for a system that wins when it counts. Josh, is it that simple?
I don't think it is, right? I don't think it is, and I don't think it'd be wise right now to get rid of Mike McDaniel. We've always heard how almost called him Don Shula. Stephen Ross wanted his young Don Shula. I mean, you have it here with Mike McDaniel. This guy has proven that he can take someone that a lot of this league has, wanted to recycle, throw in a bin, he can go somewhere else, maybe be a feel-good story like Justin Fields, maybe rejuvenate his career. No, he came in here and said why he was going to make Tua Tagovailoa work. He built this team around Tua Tagovailoa. And I think the biggest misconception, I see a lot of things going around on Twitter about Tua Tagovailoa and how, he's a perfect fit for this offense. This offense was built by Mike McDaniel. So to me, the biggest key to this Dolphins team and the success moving forward, as much as we want to say Tua Tagovailoa is that guy, it isn't to me. It is Mike McDaniel and his system. So I do not want to see Mike McDaniel go, but as you told me before, Jake, as we've seen before, it does not matter what us fans want. Stephen Ross is tired of losing, tired of not seeing this team win a playoff game. And we've seen Brian Flores, get kicked aside, despite we know there are other issues there. We've seen coaches before, him move on just like that. So for as much as I say it can't happen, we've seen before that it can happen. I just feel like if the Dolphins want to truly get to that team and be that pinnacle, that, consistent factor in the AFC, they got to keep Mike McDaniel around and continue to do what they're doing. I just hope they can figure out something here with Tua Tagovailoa, because, again, that's the X factor. And I think, despite what people want to say, is this offense would still be built or still run effectively without Tua Tagovailoa, because Mike McDaniel would build it that way. What about you, Jake? What are your thoughts? Because this, again, is the perfect emo way to end this podcast.
It is the ideal conundrum of being a Dolphins fan, because even though that final year of Brian Flores, the Dolphins started 1-7, they finished that year without, they overcame a losing record. And the idea was, all right, well, we don't have the losing record. We need to win playoff games. Nothing else matters except for winning playoff games. And if Mike McDaniel goes 3 seasons, Josh, without winning a playoff game, that has to be somewhat viewed as a failure. And that's not the full conversation, but I think it has to be viewed somewhat as a failure. Like, if you're going to push all the chips in, if you're going to do the quote unquote tank, but not tank, but actually, yes, we are obviously tanking, you got to have something to show for it. If you're going to push in all the chips to sign Tyreek Hill, to sign Bradley Chubb, you're doing that to win playoff games. And the Dolphins haven't done that. So in that sense, you'd be so disappointed that this hasn't been a success. You wasted picks. You wasted everyone's time. But at the same time, Josh, the Dolphins have one of the most exciting teams I've ever witnessed as being a fan of this franchise. Are you willing to throw away an offense that I was talking to someone on Twitter where it seems like there are so many situations with this offense that has us saying like, oh God, no, wait, yes, it worked. Like there are so many plays that look like they're going to be so brutally awful, and then it just works out. And that's the Mike McDaniel system. You have other coaches around the NFL copying the Miami Dolphins by week 8, 9 because it's that Mike McDaniel system. So while the Dolphins haven't had that playoff game, while they haven't had the one thing they want the most, they have everything else. And that is such a hard line to settle on. Like, what do you do? I think you keep them, but I mean, I get it.
Yeah, and I guess for the biggest thing here is, if this is a catastrophic season, right? That's when Stephen Ross has to make a decision. If things absolutely go, falter, I don't know, man. We've seen it before where these teams sputter late in the season, and that's enough for someone to get the job fired. I just don't think that after everything he's been through as a coach, after everything we've been through as fans, that you get rid of him. But one of the most interesting things, and we'll wrap it up shortly after this, but someone said, do you think they're waiting on this Tua Tagovailoa extension because of these guys kind of all being twined together, right? You got Mike McDaniel, his contract, Chris Greer. I think, I don't even know where they're at, but I feel like these guys are all intertwined together. And, maybe they're waiting to see if they can get to this next level before ultimately, extending to a time level. But I think that gets done before the start of this thing. I just cannot imagine, man, a Miami Dolphins team in 2025 without Mike McDaniel, no matter how crazy things went. I mean, they're literally adding his motions. Like you mentioned, the league capping him. They're literally one of the key features in the new Madden games, literally like the offensive system that he's like brought to the league. So it's just wild what this Dolphins team has become and how our expectations have shifted, right? Our expectations are at a whole different level than they were, many years ago. And we were just happy to not be 7-9 and 8-8.
And could you really see Stephen Ross stomaching it? Like the first primetime football game that Mike McDaniel has as like the offensive coordinator elsewhere, where everyone's talking about just this offensive genius and they're like highlighting all the motions he did. And after doing that all with Flores and having a successful team and still moving on from him, I don't know how you can do it, man. That is a tough situation.
I think I'd give him full control before I'd get rid of him. I get rid of Greer and give Mike Daniel full control. But we're talking crazy now. It don't matter. They're winning the playoffs, winning a Super Bowl this year, and we're going to the parade, baby.
I don't want Tua and McDaniel to be intertwined. I'd be so – if it was a scenario where they move on from Tua, I'm so on board to letting Mike McDaniel cook some others, see what he could cook up. I'd be on board to see that. I think we've seen enough. From Jose, Josh, to wrap up, does coach simplify the offense without losing its touch so we can execute in December and January? Josh, this could be the simple issue to the solution to all our problems. Is Mike McDaniel hamstringing this offense in the later months from it being so cold in these harsh environments when he's taking too damn long to get those plays in?
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is, right? I think, again, I started to look at this and realize, again, Mike McDaniel's a very young play caller, right? I think he's going into year 3. This guy's still getting the hang of things. And let's be honest, those late games, those are some of the most intense, playoff scenarios on the line against rivals. So maybe it's all the anxiety and things like that all have hit him. I don't know if he's going to simplify. That'd be the last thing I'd see from him, right? I mean, he's already simplified it enough so that it's operated so efficiently as it has. I think that if anything, he's going to save some of those, plays towards later in the year and, really show off defenses what they have. But I don't know, man. What are your thoughts, Jake? I just want to see him execute in December and January. That's all I care about.
I wouldn't hate it if we saw the Dolphins on the line with 25 seconds left on the play clock. I think that'd actually be pretty exciting in December and January. The Dolphins haven't been in that. It's been a lot of panic at the line, running up to the line, 3-4 seconds left. And you could argue a couple of things there. It could be, year 1, year 2, you don't entirely know the offense, whether you're the playmakers and the quarterback. Year 2, I mean, the offensive line, all the issues. You're trying to line up all those guys as well. So I think there is a little bit to Mike McDaniel, for the love of God, can you just let the players just win? I think he does have a little scenario where he always is trying to call the right play to beat the opposing defense instead of saying, Tyreek Hill, just go beat your coverage one-on-one, make it happen. He's always trying to win before the play, and I think there'd be some scenarios where he could sacrifice some of that and let his players win after the snap, and I think the Dolphins would benefit from that.
I'm good with it. Let's just save some of those Jalen Wright packages and things like that. Some of that more creative stuff. I posted a video yesterday. It was AHN. He looked like he was like a throw a pass last season, and he had
Dude, that was so. I can't believe you shared that. He should be suspended for a week.
It was two those wide open. I had to make sure I mentioned how skinny Tua could have ran that thing 80 yards, but that would have never happened.
Dude, that play was so bad. That was so bad. That offense looked so helpless against the Bills, and then they break at the Devon Achane pass. Ugh.
It's coming. Prepare thyself.
Dude, I'm so happy to be back podcasting with you. Thank you all so much for listening to Another Dolphins podcast. We are going to pick things up as we get closer to training camp. Joshua, we got a book club coming later this week, and then we'll get going next week. We'll start a recap series going through all the moves the Dolphins have made this offseason. Kat will be joining us for that. One final time, shout out Devin. More importantly, shout out to everyone listening to the podcast, sending us your questions, giving us your ratings and reviews. That stuff means the world to us. We apologize if you did not win the giveaway. We will promise to do more giveaways in the future to get you some of the well-deserved video games, jerseys, whatever we decide to do. But thank you all so much for listening. We will talk to you soon. But until then, fins up.
Fins up.